everyone. So we're the EcoAgriculture Partners team, and we're studying landscape management in California. This is our lovely team led by our advisor, Dr. Liz Kosov. Our client is EcoAgriculture Partners, which is a global nonprofit, and through their 1,000 Landscapes program, they conduct landscape research and policy advocacy all around the world. So what exactly is a landscape? I'm sure when you hear this term, many of you think of like a pretty view or your desktop wallpaper. But in this project, we're going to explore how interconnected landscape and its management is and why that's important. Specifically, we're exploring a topic called integrated landscape management, which is a new, more collaborative way of looking at landscapes that's proposed by our client. To break it down, integrated landscape management, like I said, is a collaborative approach that takes place as multi-sector, multi-partner in a place over time. This means that it draws from the expertise of people from different fields such as engineering, urban planning, and more. It involves multiple partners and stakeholders, more than just the traditional approach of only having the landowner and the urban planner involved in managing the landscape. And it involves long-term and dedicated monitoring and evaluating systems in that specific place for a longer period of time than usual. I'm going to break down the steps of integrated landscape management now using the Tijuana River watershed as an example. So step one is to identify a common entry point. This basically means the environmental problem that everyone is coming together to solve. In this case, it's sea level rise adaptation and recovering biodiversity and endangered species restoration. Step two is to engage with land management authorities. These are all the stakeholders that can either green light or red light the project. And in this case, it's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, San Diego County, and California State Parks. And step three, and this is what's unique to ILM, is engaging with all the other stakeholders and downstream beneficiaries that have a stake in this project. And I really do want to highlight this quote by Kristen Goodrich, whom we interviewed, who says, "The future of these types of projects is involving tribal partners in a way that gives them a seat at the table from project inception." So as you can see, it's really important to involve tribal groups and governments in this type of landscape work, because not only do they possess cultural and personal relationships with the land, but they also possess traditional ecological knowledge or native knowledge. And this can include things like cultural burns and other practices that are specific to native groups that we can all afford to learn from. To learn more about ILM in California, we came up with 4 goals that aligned with our clients' requests. By conducting expert interviews, research, and analysis, we were able to find specific case studies of ILM in California and find state, federal, and private funding sources, as well as policy levers for ILM. And we also wanted to find the kind of terminology that people, especially experts, were using to describe ILM. And then lastly, we wanted to find stakeholders that we could recommend to our client EcoAgriculture to collaborate with on future projects. So moving on to results, one of the main things our client wanted us to look for was what they described as entry points, or rather California-specific ILM applications. So one of the first ones we found was wildfire resilience. As we all know, California is experiencing longer, more devastating fire seasons, which means that there are plenty of organizations like the Big Sur Land Trust and opportunities for ILM as time goes on. The next one we found was water security and coastal restoration. Many of the experts we spoke to had experience with water-related projects, and considering many parts of California, especially Southern California, are re-entering a drought, we found that this was a particularly relevant entry point that EcoAgriculture could use. And then 2 of the other entry points we found that are specific to California are habitat restoration and climate adaptation.
So kind of speaking on the terminology that is used to describe ILM, we have discovered, as we know, that ILM is an abstract concept. During the interviews, we realized a lot of the stakeholders did not use this specific terminology to describe the work that they did. So here in this word cloud above you, we can visualize the most common and prevalent terms in order to identify current projects from the root, core, and function of their work. So here, if we look at the word cloud, we have multi-stakeholder, landscape scale, restoration, place-based, also multi-jurisdictional, as some of the top ones that you see in the dark green. To tie in with Maeve McAllister's quote, "Wildfire does not respect jurisdictional boundaries, so why should our mitigation strategy respect jurisdictional boundaries?" And that's kind of just to emphasize the cross-boundary aspect of landscape management work. So some of the common barriers and solutions to ILM, from the first ones is that there's a lot of funding challenges as well as tying in with federal uncertainty. A lot of the interviews that we spoke with within their organization had a lot of federal funding cuts. Due to that, they had to adapt to this via diversified and dedicated funding streams. Another one is jurisdictional complexity and stakeholder tensions. And this was remediated through multi-stakeholder meetings where they developed a shared vision or plan that they can return to if tensions were to ever arise again. And just like Jeff Power says down here below, the best conservation work is the one that bubbles in from the community. They need to have some skin in the game.
So as part of our deliverables, our team compiled a list of over 25 grants that EcoAgriculture can apply to get funding for their projects. This includes both private and state-led organizations that provide funding for various ILM projects. And these projects can include coastal justice, environmental justice, agriculture, and more. And for example, the California Wildlife Conservation Board has many different funds and grant programs that EcoAgriculture could apply to that range from $1 million to $25 million that they could use towards future projects in California. And then also we developed a regulatory framework for EcoAgriculture to use to work on implementation of ILM in California. And here are a few of the acts and initiatives that are included in our spreadsheet. For example, CDFW's Cutting the Green Tape Initiative is a great example of state legislation that helps to implement ILM strategies. And it represents environmental permitting with support from General Counsel and executive leadership. The aim of the initiative is to help develop and implement the way that CDFW issues their permits and administers grant programs in order to accelerate the pace and scale of restoration in California.
So kind of just coming to a close, we have some of the recommendations for eco-agriculture that come from our interviewees. So step one here, we want to leverage the common entry points within California. We've identified them as wildfire resilience, water habitat restoration, and as well as water security. Number two is to partner with established organizations. We've identified them via the common entry points, as well as those who have prior experience with multi-sectoral and multi-partner issues, as well as interviewees who have expressed interest within our interview process. Number three is to connect with local stakeholders, and that comes with how Jesse Odell states here. Think about how to enter the community in a way that doesn't feel extractive, and that comes with understanding the local context of California via building relationships with local tribes, tribal groups, local communities, and already established organizations. And last is to apply to funding. We have a spreadsheet that has the deadlines and also statuses of current California funding resources that we will provide to our clients. Lastly, within our research, we realized that a lot of landscape work and issues can become political issues due to the fact that multi-stakeholder people just have disagreements. And just here, as Dan Silver says, this is not about, party politics, but this is about outcomes that benefit different interests. So as we leave you guys here today, we just want to let you know that landscape and environmental issues are truly bipartisan, especially when achieving the goals and successes of your work. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience? Yeah, Brad.
I got one. So one of your pullout quotes, which I thought was very accurate and relevant, is that environmental issues don't know political boundaries, and yet everything you're doing is California, and that's a political boundary. How do you kind of rectify those? As you said, politics is important. Politics is political boundaries. Funding is important. It's oftentimes political things. What do you think?
I can take this question. I think there are several ways we're trying to kind of surpass the politicization of environmental issues. The first one was looking at what terminology is used. And one of the reasons we did that is so that our clients can better market themselves and also apply to funding organizations without being restricted because of key terms that are being used, as many other groups have mentioned before. The other thing is eco-agriculture really does emphasize kind of cross-boundary work because they're an international organization. So they draw from their experiences of working across boundaries through a lot of their other programs, such as 1,000 Landscapes, and kind of like the goal is to try to adopt that into California and not really rely on being restricted by territory through involving multiple stakeholders. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it's the terminology and multi-sectoral work that they're trying to do to surpass like being a partisan issue. You want to add something?
Yeah, I could also add, I think just as like an example for it, like we talked about the Tijuana River estuary, and that was a very like binational project involving like Mexico and California. So that's just an example of how like that is also like what is identified as ILM. Also, one of the other organizations that we interviewed was the Smith River Alliance, who worked across the boundary of the Oregon and like North California boundary. That is also, as we identified, as a project of like integrated landscape management. So there's many instances where it is cross-boundary.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Steve.